The studio lights blazed overhead, their heat pressing down like the midday Texas sun. The CNN debate stage gleamed under the cameras, the polished floor reflecting two podiums placed just far enough apart to suggest civility, but close enough for sparks to fly. The audience's chatter rolled like distant thunder, a mixture of excitement and tension that had been building for days. Tonight wasn't just any debate. Tonight was the showdown between Texas Governor Greg Abbott and Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, the media darling from New York. In the green room just minutes earlier, producers had whispered that ratings were already breaking records. On social media, hashtags mixing both names trended worldwide. Everyone seemed to know something explosive was coming, even before a word had been spoken. Abbott entered first, wheeling himself across the stage with steady confidence, a slight smile acknowledging the crowd. There was no rush in his movement, no sign of nerves. He had faced hurricanes, political storms, and partisan firestorms before. This was just another battlefield. Moments later, AOC stepped out from the opposite wing. Her red blazer popped under the lights, her hair pulled back in a sharp bun, her eyes already scanning Abbott like a predator sizing up her target. She waved briefly to the crowd, then positioned herself behind her podium, her expression calm but unmistakably charged. Anderson Cooper's voice cut through the hum. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to tonight's debate on America's energy future." Applause followed, but it was polite, restrained, as though the audience was saving its real reaction for what they knew would come next. From the first glance exchanged between Abbott and AOC, it was clear, this wasn't going to be a quiet policy discussion. It was going to be a fight for the narrative. And neither was planning to back down. Anderson Cooper barely finished his opening question before AOC leaned forward, her voice sharp and deliberate. "Governor Abbott, Texas clings to fossil fuels like it's still 1950. While the rest of the world moves toward clean energy, you keep your state chained to oil and gas. Tell me, when hurricanes flood Houston again and wildfires scorch the panhandle, will you look those families in the eye and tell them your policies didn't make it worse?" Gasps rippled through the audience, half in agreement, half in disbelief at how quickly the tone had escalated. Cameras zoomed in on Abbott's face, searching for a flicker of irritation. Instead, he adjusted his suit jacket, waited for the murmurs to die, and spoke in a calm, steady Texas drawl. "Congresswoman," Abbott began, "Texans don't run from challenges. We face them head-on. And the families you're talking about, they're not statistics to me. They're the same people I've met in Odessa, in Houston, in small towns you've never visited. They work the rigs, they build the refineries, they power this country. And yes, they also put food on their tables because of those jobs you want to replace with promises that may never come." A low rumble of applause started on the right side of the room, spreading slowly. Abbott kept his tone measured, but his words hit with the precision of a courtroom cross-examination. "You talk about hurricanes and wildfires," he continued, "but I talk about the men and women who risk everything to keep our lights on during those disasters. You want to shut down their livelihoods without a plan that works today, not 10 years from now, not after another trillion-dollar bill out of Washington." The audience broke into louder applause. AOC's lips tightened, her fingers drumming lightly against the podium. She had drawn first blood, but Abbott had countered without raising his voice, grounding his argument in the people of Texas, the very foundation of his political armor. The tension in the studio thickened. Viewers at home didn't need to be told, this was just the opening salvo. Anderson Cooper pivoted to the next question, but the undercurrent from Abbott's last words still lingered. The cameras caught AOC leaning slightly forward, her expression sharpening. She wasn't going to let him have the last clean strike. "Governor," she said, her tone almost surgical, "you keep talking about the people in Texas as if you own the definition of their future. But the truth is, while you defend oil CEOs, communities in your own state are choking on polluted air, drinking contaminated water, and paying the price for your loyalty to an industry that's destroying our planet." The crowd reacted instantly, half clapping, half groaning. Abbott didn't flinch. He tapped the edge of his podium once, as if anchoring himself, and began. Congresswoman, I'll tell you who I'm loyal to, Maria in Midland, who's putting 2 kids through college working double shifts at a drilling site. Javier in Corpus Christi, who paid off his mortgage because he had steady work on a pipeline. Those aren't CEOs. Those are Texans, and they don't appreciate you painting their livelihoods as a crime. The applause came faster this time, a wave moving through the audience. Abbott leaned forward, voice steady but carrying an unmistakable edge. You want to talk about pollution? Let's talk about progress. Texas is the #1 producer of wind energy in America. We're investing in carbon capture technology. We've reduced emissions while keeping our economy strong. That's called leadership, balancing the environment and the economy, something Washington could learn from. AOC opened her mouth to interject, but the crowd's reaction drowned her out. The sound wasn't just support, it was momentum shifting. Abbott had taken her accusation, reframed it, and turned it into a badge of honor for Texas. Viewers watching at home weren't just hearing facts, they were feeling the pride in his voice, the defiance in his stance. And that, more than any statistic, was what made the moment land. Anderson Cooper stepped in, his tone careful, sensing the tension climbing higher. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, the governor points to Texas's leadership in renewable energy while maintaining its oil and gas economy. How do you respond? AOC didn't hesitate. Texas may lead in wind power, but under Governor Abbott, it's also led in greenhouse gas emissions. You can't pat yourself on the back for building a few wind farms while letting fossil fuel companies run wild. The truth is, Governor, your policies aren't about balance, they're about protecting an outdated system that's failing the American people. Murmurs swept through the audience, a mix of approval and dissent. Abbott waited, letting the moment breathe, his hands resting loosely on the podium. Then he spoke, voice calm but laced with steel. Congresswoman, the system you call outdated feeds millions, fuels an economy that keeps the lights on from New York to California, and provides paychecks to families who don't have the luxury of waiting for Washington to figure out how to fund your vision. When you talk about shutting it down, you're talking about shutting them down. A ripple of applause began, louder than before. Abbott leaned forward, his eyes locking on hers. You see, Texans aren't looking for lectures. They're looking for solutions that work today, solutions that keep their kids fed, their homes powered, and their communities alive. And we've proven we can grow renewables without destroying what we've built. AOC's jaw tightened, and the cameras caught it. Abbott's words weren't just landing, they were anchoring in the minds of viewers who saw not just a policy argument, but a clash of values. In the control room, producers knew they had their moment, the governor refusing to bend, framing himself as the protector of his people against what he painted as dangerous idealism. The crowd could feel it. This wasn't just a debate anymore, it was a battle over whose America they wanted to live in. Anderson Cooper's next question was directed at Abbott, but before he could answer, AOC cut in, her voice firm and unyielding. Governor, what you call dangerous idealism is actually survival. We don't have the luxury of waiting. Every year of inaction costs lives, from heat waves in Texas to floods in the Northeast. The science is clear, and pretending otherwise is not leadership, it's negligence. The crowd stirred, half clapping, half booing. The camera panned to Abbott, who didn't look shaken in the slightest. He adjusted his microphone, leaned forward, and met AOC's gaze. Congresswoman, I've been called a lot of things in my time, Abbott began, his voice even but carrying a sharp undertone, but negligent isn't one of them. When a hurricane hit the Texas coast, I was there before FEMA. When our grid was tested, I fought to keep power flowing. And while Washington debates theories, Texas builds solutions. Real, tangible ones. The applause was immediate and louder than before. Abbott continued, seizing the momentum. You talk about survival, so do I. But survival isn't built on shutting down industries that feed millions. It's built on making them cleaner, stronger, and more efficient. That's exactly what we're doing in Texas. And maybe that's the difference between us. I deal with reality as it is, not as I wish it to be. The studio filled with clapping, some people rising to their feet. AOC's eyes narrowed, her lips pressed into a thin line, but she didn't interrupt. Anderson Cooper raised a hand to settle the noise, but the energy in the room was already transformed. Abbott wasn't just answering questions, he was reframing the entire debate as a choice between idealism and practical action, and the audience was leaning into his frame. For viewers at home, the message was crystal clear: Abbott wasn't backing down, and every word he spoke was aimed not just at AOC, but at the millions watching across the country. Anderson Cooper shifted in his chair, glancing at both candidates. Let's move to the question of federal versus state authority in addressing climate change. But before he could finish, AOC leaned in, her voice cutting through the air. Governor, the problem isn't that you're dealing with reality. It's that your reality is built on protecting corporate profits over people's lives. You stand here talking about jobs, but what about the families who've lost everything to floods? What about the children in Texas growing up breathing toxic air because you won't hold big polluters accountable? The crowd reacted, half cheering, half booing. Abbott's eyes narrowed slightly, but his face stayed composed. He let the noise wash over him before responding in a firm, steady drawl. Congresswoman, I have been holding people accountable my entire career: criminals, corrupt officials, anyone who puts Texans at risk. And I'll tell you this: I won't let Washington politicians paint my people as villains just because they work in an industry you don't approve of. A burst of applause erupted. Abbott kept going, his voice rising just enough to ride over the cheers. You say I'm protecting corporations? No, I'm protecting the men and women who get up before dawn, who work 14-hour shifts, who miss their kids' soccer games to make sure the power stays on for millions of Americans, including you. The applause swelled again, this time mixed with whistles and shouts of, "That's right," from the audience. Abbott paused, then leaned forward slightly, locking eyes with AOC. And Congresswoman, if you think you can shame Texans for building the backbone of this country's energy supply, you've got another thing coming. The studio erupted. The moment wasn't just a counterpunch, it was a warning shot. Abbott had drawn his line in the sand, and everyone watching knew it. The energy in the room shifted. You could feel it in the way the audience leaned forward, in the sudden roar of applause that refused to fade. Greg Abbott had just thrown down a challenge, and the crowd wasn't just responding, they were rallying. Anderson Cooper attempted to interject, but the sound was too loud. The camera panned across the faces in the studio, some smiling and clapping, others shaking their heads, but all locked in on the two figures at center stage. AOC straightened her posture, refusing to let Abbott's words go unanswered. Governor, no one is shaming Texans for working hard. What I'm saying is, there's a better future, one where those same people work in clean energy jobs that protect their health and the planet. Abbott didn't even wait for the applause from her side to subside. Congresswoman, you keep talking about this better future like it's a magic trick you can pull out of a hat. But you can't build it overnight. You can't feed families with promises. And you sure can't run the largest state economy in the nation on what-ifs and somedays. The audience erupted again. This time louder, the clapping rolling like a wave. Abbott's voice cut through it. You want to know what Texans care about? They care about keeping the lights on during a storm. They care about having a paycheck on Friday. And they care about leaders who don't gamble their livelihoods on Washington experiments. The applause became a standing ovation for several rows. Abbott glanced briefly at the crowd, then back at AOC, his expression steady but unyielding. In that moment, the debate had tipped. This wasn't about who had the sharper statistics, it was about who could connect to the core of the American working-class mindset. And Abbott was playing that card to perfection. Anderson Cooper finally regained control of the stage, his voice cutting through the lingering applause. Let's focus now on the human impact of these policies. Congresswoman, you've proposed a nationwide transition to renewables within 10 years. Governor Abbott, you've argued that's unrealistic. I'd like each of you to address how your approach protects families in the immediate term. AOC was quick to answer. Governor, protecting families means protecting their future. You talk about jobs today, but you ignore the hospital visits from asthma, the farmland ruined by drought, the homes washed away in floods. If you truly cared about Texans, you'd put their health ahead of oil company profits. The crowd reacted with scattered applause, but Abbott's expression didn't waver. He waited for complete silence, then leaned toward the microphone. Congresswoman, I care about Texans so much that I've spent my life fighting for them, long before you had your first social media account. And let me tell you about immediate term. Immediate term is Maria in Del Rio, whose diner stayed open because we kept the power running when Washington hesitated. Immediate term is Bill in Laredo, whose ranch is still standing because we sent the Texas National Guard when federal agents didn't show. A hush fell over the crowd as Abbott's voice gained weight. These aren't oil executives. They're hard-working people. They're my people. And while you're promising them a future they can't yet see, I'm making sure they survive the week, the month, the year. That's the difference between talking and leading. The audience erupted into another wave of applause, longer and louder than before. AOC's jaw tightened, and she looked down for the briefest moment, a small crack, but one the cameras caught instantly. For the viewers at home, it was clear, this was turning into more than a policy debate. Abbott was making it personal, weaving real faces and stories into his defense. And every time he did, the tide in the room seemed to shift further in his favor. Anderson Cooper glanced at the clock, aware the debate was entering its final stretch. Governor Abbott, you'll have the last word on this topic before we move to closing statements. Abbott leaned forward, his voice lowering just enough to make the audience lean in. Congresswoman, you've painted me as someone clinging to the past. But let me tell you something about Texas, we don't live in the past, we build the future. And we do it without tearing apart the livelihoods of the people who built this country. The room was silent except for the hum of the cameras. Abbott let the pause linger before continuing. You talk about health, safety, the environment, so do I. That's why Texas leads in wind power, why we're expanding solar, why we're investing in carbon capture. But we're doing it while keeping 480,000 Texans working in oil and gas, jobs that pay for their homes, their kids' education, their retirement. We're proving you can protect the planet and protect people at the same time. A swell of applause rose, steady and confident. Abbott's tone hardened. And here's the truth, Congresswoman, when you attack the industries that power America, you're not just attacking Texas. You're attacking every family that depends on a paycheck from those industries. You're telling them they don't matter. I'm here to tell them they do. The audience erupted, cheers, whistles, people on their feet. The sound was almost deafening. AOC stood still, her expression tight, knowing the optics of this moment were shifting against her. In living rooms across the country, viewers weren't just hearing policy differences, they were watching a fight for identity. And in that arena, Abbott had managed to frame himself as the defender of the everyday American, the man standing between them and what he painted as reckless change. It wasn't just a rebuttal, it was the kind of closing line that sticks in the headlines, the kind that goes viral by morning. The studio lights seemed brighter now, the air heavier with anticipation. Anderson Cooper gave a small nod, signaling Abbott to deliver his closing statement. Abbott looked out over the audience, then directly into the camera, his voice steady but charged with conviction. Folks, this isn't just about Texas and New York arguing over energy policy. This is about who we are as Americans. Do we build on the hard work of generations, or do we tear it down for ideas that sound good in speeches but fall apart in real life? He paused, letting the question hang. The crowd was silent, leaning forward as if they didn't want to miss a single word. In Texas, we face challenges head-on. We protect our jobs, our families, and our future, not by gambling everything on untested promises, but by building a path that works today and tomorrow. That's not fear of change, that's respect for the people who make this country run. Applause started low and grew into a roar. Abbott kept his focus on the camera. To every American watching, whether you work on a drilling rig, a wind farm, or in a small-town diner, know this: I will fight for you. I will stand between you and anyone who thinks they can decide your worth from a desk in Washington. And I won't back down. The crowd erupted, standing ovations, cheers, shouts of "Abbott" echoing across the studio. Anderson Cooper tried to speak, but the noise was overpowering. AOC, still at her podium, forced a polite smile, but the optics were unmistakable. Abbott had owned the final moment, wrapping himself in the mantle of protector, pragmatist, and fighter for the working American. As the cameras faded to black, producers in the control room already knew which clip would dominate the morning news: Greg Abbott, calm but unyielding, telling the country he wouldn't back down. For Abbott supporters, it wasn't just a win, it was a rallying cry. For his critics, it was a reminder that in the arena of public perception, sometimes one decisive moment can shift the whole game.